Blind Dave from Austin, Texas.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Very good. Uh, Ashley's here. She come up to me, I guess, about a month ago, asked me if I had an open Friday that I could come speak to this group. And I always like to meet new people. It always feels funny when I ask, well, what town is this? Because people are coming from everywhere on these Zoom meetings. But I like to get to know good people, new people. And if any of y'all ever have time, I'll probably give you some contact information later on. I love to hear from people. I'm not one of these people who does Facebook and social media. I'm not real computer savvy. So I'm still a telephone kind of person, and you're welcome to call me anytime. But I'm glad to be here tonight, and I think Zoom has turned out to be a wonderful thing for Alcoholics Anonymous in a lot of ways. I know that newcomers are suffering because of it, I believe, but there are a lot of the upside to these Zoom meetings, and I'm glad to get to speak to people, in faraway places. That's great. So I am Blind Dave, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is July 9 of 98, and I'm a member of the Primary Purpose Group here in Austin, the Big Book Study, and have been a member of that group since its beginning. So that's where I know Ashley from. So I was born in Houston, Texas, and had really good parents, actually. My dad came back from the war. He served well. He came back a fairly decorated man and was very proud of his war record. And he married my mom right after the war and got his share of the baby boom started. And in fact, I was born on Pearl Harbor Day of 1948. My dad was a man of honor. His word was gold, and he was highly respected because of his integrity. My mother also was regarded as nothing less than a saint in our community. She was a deeply religious woman and did lots of acts of charity for people in the community. And now the only problem with having a religious mother like that is that every Sunday morning she woke me up and said, "Got your shirt on, got your pants pressed, got everything all laid out here for church?" And I had to get up and get ready to go to church. I could hear my friends outside playing. And the older I got, the more I resented that. So about the time I finished junior high, I decided I just stayed in bed. And mother came in, and she said, "Your clothes are all laid out. You need to get ready for church." And I said, "I'm not going." And she said, "What?" I said, "I think I'm old enough now to decide for myself on this matter. And I've decided I'm not going to church anymore." I was braced for the argument, but she did not argue with me. She just started to cry. Made me feel really weird. I wasn't expecting that. It was the first time I ever made my mother cry. But it sure turned out not to be the last time. So I entered high school in 1965, proclaimed myself to be an atheist, and I became known as a very militant atheist in my high school. In fact, I was reading books about, Darwin's theory of evolution and the fossil record, and I became very anti-religious and opposed to the whole creation model. I had a lot of religious kids in my high school too, and I became their target because I was so outspoken. And I can remember a time getting cornered in the bathroom. I was in there, smoking in the boys' room between classes with the little thugs I hung out with. And I got cornered by some of the little religious kids in there who started to try to witness to me, they call it. And I did what I always do. I lit into these kids with my well-prepared arguments. And I was so aggressively intimidating that I'm sure they just kind of wish they'd never brought the subject up. And I remember as they were backing away from me, just sure lightning was going to strike any moment, one of the kids said, "You're going to go to hell." And I said, "To hell with you and to hell with your God." And that was my attitude about that. And I wasn't ashamed to let you know. I graduated in 1960. Well, let me admit, there was another thing happened in high school. That's where my drinking really took off. I met a girl in high school that I was dating, and her parents are serious drinkers. And I guess they didn't mind if we drank with them. Guess they figured if you're in high school, you're old enough. So as soon as I figured that out, I just started going over to her house every weekend and spending the weekend with them. And her mom would pick us up on Friday after school was out. We'd run out and jump in the car, and I mean the ice chest was in the back seat, all iced down, and we popped the top before we ever got off the campus. So I through high school, I was drinking solid from Friday after school to they dropped me off with a hangover on Monday morning. And I graduated in 1968. And another thing I remember around that time, shortly after I graduated, there was this rock group that had suddenly become a big success here in America. And they were on their first American tour. And they passed through Houston in October, the year right after I graduated. And what I remember about that concert was standing out in the line to wait for them to open up the booth and start taking tickets and letting us in, you know. And here come the Jesus freaks down the line, passing out their literature. And I did what I always do. I let into those kids and began to just chew them up with my arguments, you know. And the whole crowd of people surrounded me, started cheering for me. I'll tell you, I was very proud of myself. I knew Murray Madeline O'Hare would have been proud to have called me her son. That concert, by the way, was the Grand Funk Railroad concert. If any of y'all remember that group, they were really hot for a while. But all this was going on back in the 60s. You know what else was going on back in the 60s? We were growing our hair out long and protesting and rebelling. Hey, there's some stuff going on today that kind of reminds me of those days. But so there, you know, and there was a lot of stuff out on the street you could do besides just drink, and I probably did every one of them, and got pretty strung out on the meth for about 5 years. But you know, it reminded me of what Bill Wilson said in his story. He said, "Then the doctor came and began to administer heavy sedatives. The next day found me doing both gin and sedatives. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. And I suppose it was the combination that accelerated my trip to the bottom. But by the age of 24, and I'm just 5 years out of high school, and those little thugs that I hung out with, in 5 years' time, 7 of them were dead. We started off thinking we were hard partiers, but I think there was more to it than that. One day I was, you know, well, and I was burning to the ground, by the way. And one day I was standing out in front of my house in the yard, just wasted to the max. And this guy who was my new neighbor came over, introduced himself to me. Turned out he was a Christian. He tried to turn the conversation toward God, and I did what I always do. I lit into this dude, and I bounced off of this cat. I mean, he pulled the Bible right out of his pocket. I never met one of those kind before. And he started flipping through that book, and he countered all my arguments. The thing that I remember the most was that he was not hostile. He just commanded a presence of God, and it got my attention. In fact, it cracked my shell. And for the next couple of months, from time to time, when he would see me, he would stop and just visit. And I began to ask him questions, and he began to share his faith with me. And I remember the day when I came to believe. I believed this cat had something, and I wanted it. And I came to believe, and I never will forget the day that I kneeled down, turned my life over to God. I got up from that prayer a different person. I threw away all my stash and poured out all my booze and felt freed from my obsession. I had a very powerful third step experience. But what does the big book say that we must do immediately after the third step? The fourth step, a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves to remove the things that would choke off that experience. Well, I didn't do any of that stuff. I don't think any of them church people knew any steps past give your life to God. So what I did do is I went off to church with my new neighbor and my new buddy. And, I can shout hallelujah right along with the rest of them. I'm also a bit of a musician, and it didn't take no time. They had me up there on the platform. I was a part of the worship team. And pretty soon I was in charge of the worship team. I studied my Bible hard and became a deacon in the church. Sometimes if the pastor was out of town or something, he'd even let me fill in, preach for him sometimes. Then I started getting some gigs on my own to come be a visiting speaker at other churches. I mean, I went off to East Texas then and started a little church out in a country town and tried my hand at being a pastor. I mean, I really learned how to do the church thing. But the big book says that without having done those inventory steps, what I did not learn was enough humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary. We who? Yeah, you and me. We alcoholics find it particularly necessary to do something about this self-will run riot and this ego problem we have. Well, I didn't do any of that work. So sure enough, the day came when I had this thought that said, I think my problem was mostly drugs. I don't think it'd be a problem if I had a drink once in a while. So starting with the idea that I would just have a drink once in a while, I found myself back in the progression of alcoholism. And again, the big book says more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. So the days came when I started finding myself preaching with a hangover. And for 25 years, teaching and preaching the Bible with a hangover became the recurring theme of my life. Each time I hit a new bottom, I'd switch brands of religion, thinking there must be something wrong with our theology here. And this other group down the road swore they had more power. So I'd change brands of religion, and go to a different church. And, for a time I would seem to be fixed. I'd think this new brand of religion must be the answer. And for a while I'd seem to be fixed. And during one of those times when I thought I was fixed this time, I moved from Houston to Austin. Like I say, I do a little music. I got a friend here who's a really good slide blues guitar player, and I like to play the harmonica and sing the blues. And we started writing gospel music in sort of a blues rock style. And we started playing around town a little bit at open mics and things. And believe it or not, I became one of those who were witnessing for the Lord, and one night we come down from playing, and this girl came up and introduced herself to us. She had a little thing going with God and liked our music. Well, I had just started, I was trying to start a little home church. I was new to Austin, and I had a few people coming over to the living room and on Sunday morning, having a little meeting. I invited her to come to that. Sure enough, she showed up. I found out she was in AA. And I did not know AA was a spiritual program. I found it very intriguing. And so I got to know her real well. And I got to know a lot of her AA friends. And some of them would from time, now and then come to my little Sunday meeting. And sometimes I would go to an open AA meeting with her on Saturday. I really dug AA people. And after about almost 2 years, she and I got married. I really got to know some of her AA friends. And for a time, all went well until that inevitable day, which is every alcoholic is destined for it, unless they've had a significant spiritual experience to produce the necessary psychic change. Well, apparently I hadn't had all that. So sure enough, right in the middle of everything going just fine, I thought it'd be safe for me to have a drink again. And I started that little snowball rolling down the mountain. And it's growing and it's about to become an avalanche. And I was trying hard to keep at least the worst of it secret. And I felt like I was doing a pretty good job of keeping the worst of it secret, which in my mind meant I was controlling it, right? That's what I thought control meant, was you're not getting caught, right? But it was aggravating the heck out of me to do that. I didn't have a problem drinking. I had a problem with people who thought I had a problem drinking. I'm controlling it. And one day I was sitting in an AA meeting with my wife, just frustrated to the max. I could no longer sneak enough to satisfy me. And I was wishing she'd go off for the weekend on one of her AA retreats or something. And I was getting very irritable. I was kind of mad at the world in general. I felt like I was about to explode. And this guy in that meeting opened the big book to page 30 and read, "Most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like normal people. The idea that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker." And he closed the book and he said, "Well, here's the earmark of an alcoholic." He said, "If you are controlling your drinking, you're not happy about it." I felt like that dude shot an arrow right across the room and got me right in the chest, pinned me to the wall, put me to thinking. And I left that meeting wondering. And when I got home, I knew my wife was concerned as well. And I said, "Honey, I know you're getting concerned about my drinking. And to tell you the truth, I'm a little concerned myself. But I said, I just want to let you know that I'm aware of it, and I'm going to start praying about it." She said, "What are you going to do different?" And I did not know how to answer that question. I felt like she was asking me a question that had a specific answer that I did not know what it was. So I just stood there kind of speechless. And she said, "Dave, if you're thinking about drinking, or if you're thinking about not drinking, either way, you're thinking about drinking." And I went, "Oh God, you just encapsulated the last 25 years of my life. It ain't about whether I'm drinking or not drinking. It's about the struggle with it all the time." And something clicked. The trap snapped and I was caught. But that posed a little problem, see, because I've been around AA with her enough to hear y'all talk about this fearless humility and this rigorous honesty. And that's scary when you had many years of being a preacher, living a double life. I had some secrets. And I talked to an old man around her AA club and told him, I said, "A lot of these people have been coming to my little church. I don't know how to go in there and tell them that I've got a drinking problem." And he said, "Dave, they're not going to be ashamed of you. They'll be proud of you." And he was able to help me find the courage to walk into that meeting and announce to all my wife's friends who had known me for a few years now as a little preacher. I was able to say, "My name is Dave, and I'm an alcoholic." That crushed my pride to some degree. So that was the day I sort of admitted openly that I was an alcoholic and opened my heart just a little bit to Alcoholics Anonymous. You say, "What do you mean a little bit, Dave?" Well, what I mean, I was still ashamed that my Christian faith had not healed me of alcoholism. And I was so embarrassed to have to ask AA for help. So I was determined to show y'all that I did not need much help. Well, what does that mean, Dave? Did you get a sponsor? No, I don't think I need one of those. Are you going to work the steps? No, I don't think I need to get that involved. Well, what are you going to do? I continue to go to a meeting now and then with my wife. I'll go to some meetings with, minimal participation, of course. I only plan to get about ankle deep into AA, and me and the church will work out the rest. See, I still had a lot of religious pride. So what about this step 2, though? I had trouble with it also. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, I came to believe 25 years ago and had not been able to stay sober. How do you come to believe all over again? I did not know. And what about this word sanity? Are they saying that I'm insane? Well, as I read the big book, I found out that they were talking about the moment of insanity which precedes the first drink. And I went, oh, I see. I would hear them share in meetings about that experience. And then I'd read some more of the big book, and I'd hear people in the meetings talk about that and put it all in perspective for me. And I'd go, oh, I see. And I began to see me in the big book. And one day I was sitting in a meeting having another aha moment. When I had my step 2 experience, I suddenly came to believe that the same God that I'd had for 25 years in church was now going to start speaking to me in the language of the big book. And he was going to use the voice of other alcoholics. And I was going to hear my same old God in a brand new way. I came to believe that. And I realized that God is able to do something very unique for alcoholics through other alcoholics in a way that he can't quite do the same somewhere else. And so I fully opened my heart to Alcoholics Anonymous when I had that step 2 experience. I know what they mean when they say it's a we program. And I was glad to fully become a part because I saw my God in it. So step 3, made a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God as we understood him. And what I now understood was that for me, the care of God was going to come through AA. And I became willing to submit myself to that unique work that God does for an alcoholic through another alcoholic. I asked someone if he'd be my sponsor and became willing to let him help me. So step 3 goes on to say, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. I got stuck on that because I knew that performing his work well meant helping other alcoholics. It meant a life being committed to Alcoholics Anonymous and helping other alcoholics. And I didn't know if I wanted to make that commitment. See, I wasn't planning to stay. I wanted to learn the secret to staying sober. And then maybe I could go back over to church and finally get my ministry off the ground. And this is asking me to make a commitment to stay in AA. So I argued with God. I said, God, surely you don't think helping other alcoholics to achieve sobriety is as important as preaching the gospel of eternal life? And he said, no, but I've got people who can do that better than you, Dave. But they can't do this. And you're an alcoholic. I need your focus to be here. This is where your service to God will be. So I was able to make the commitment to become an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous and carry on that unique work that God does for alcoholics through alcoholics. It took a full surrender for me, see. At first I had to be willing to come. Then I had to become willing to stay. The big book says a fellowship has grown up among us of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. And I can tell you that for an alcoholic, sobriety is not wonderful. unless you become part of a people who have found a great purpose for being sober. The big book says we have been given a great sense of purpose, accompanied by a growing consciousness of the power of God in our lives. Every day is a day that I must carry this vision of God's will into all of my activities. How can I best serve thee? These are thoughts which must go with us constantly. So I caught the vision that God is all powerful and will provide what I need if I will agree to keep close to him and perform his work well. I saw this sort of like a contract. On page 28, it says that we form a relationship with the Creator upon simple and understandable terms. So I began to realize that to have a day-by-day ongoing experience with the Creator, there are terms and conditions that define that experience. And you can step outside of that. So it's good to know what the terms are. And so the terms are that he would do this if I would do this. It's sort of like a contract. And, you've heard these stories about people who made a contract with the devil, sold their soul to the devil, made a contract. They're just stories and legends, and after that, all they had to do was sneeze and they had a hit record. We've all heard them kind of stories. Well, that's kind of what this is like, entering into a contract with God. It's right there on page 63. A guy came up to me one time. He said, Dave, I did my step 3 this afternoon. I said, really, what'd you do? He said, well, I said, God, I turned my will and my life over to your care. I said, great. What'd he say? He said, what do you mean, what'd he say? I said, well, he had something to say about that. You got to read it out of the book, though. You're not going to get it off the wall. And I said, God says he will do this if you will do this. And so we kind of enter into this relationship with God by making this deal with him. And this guy said, making deals with God doesn't work. And I said, well, that's because you were the one that set forth the terms of the deal. God, get me out of this. And I promise, we always put forth the terms of the deal. And I guess God didn't take your offer. This is different, though. God is setting forth the terms of the contract. And you can accept it, or you can take it or leave it. But those are the terms of the agreement. Now, if you don't agree to those terms, you may stay sober, but you won't be bearing witness to his power and love and his way of life. Maybe I need to rethink my decision, my 3rd step decision. It says we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready to at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. It's a serious decision. And then the part that I didn't do 25 years ago, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action to remove the things that would block and choke off that experience. It would have little permanent effect unless at once followed by strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. And that's what steps 4 through 9 do. And if I am painstaking about those, this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. Many promises there, but the one I'm focusing on tonight is where it says fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Those are big for most of us. When we first come in here, most of us are in sort of financial straits. And so that promise caught my attention. Fear of economic insecurity would leave me. And so it says we vigorously commence this way of living. This is step 10. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We have entered the world of the Spirit. We continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. Yeah, that's because what brought me here into the world of the Spirit is what keeps me here. Continuing to take personal inventory, and when I'm wrong, promptly admitting it. So here's how now, on page 84, that we keep close to him and perform his work well. It's just a half a paragraph, but it's the whole program in a nutshell. It says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. 4 things. And when they crop up, there's 4 things we do about them. We ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. And you know, my sponsor used to say that this would solve any problem that you'll ever have. That's pretty much all he ever talked about. If he was chairing the meeting, you could bet it was going to be the topic. And if he wasn't chairing the meeting, because he was the guy that started this group many years ago. And so sometimes the chairperson would say, Ed, you got anything you want to say this morning? He was an old man, you know, and he'd say, yeah, are y'all continuing to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment? When they crop up, are you asking God? That was all he said, you know. And I remember if I'd come into the meeting someday and my halo was a little crooked, he'd say, how's your serenity today, boy? And I'd say, well, it's off a little bit today, Ed. Well, are you continuing to watch for selfishness? No, here we go again, you know. And I'd say, no, I haven't done that yet, Ed. Well, then you probably haven't asked God to remove it. Discuss it with someone and and I said, no, I haven't done that yet, Ed. I haven't done that yet. And he said, well, thank God. Because if you had done that and still felt this way, I wouldn't know what to tell you. Ed said this was a wrench that would fit any nut. And what he meant was that this simple half a paragraph would solve any problem you'll ever have. But I was getting annoyed with old Ed because that's about all he ever talked about. And until the day came when I got a letter in the mail about the middle of November, right about this time. And see, I get a bit of a disability check. And I got a letter from Social Security, middle of November, saying that my check was going to be cut $600 a month starting the 1st of December. Whoa. I had a 2-week notice. And, you know, that fear of financial insecurity that I was just kind of getting away from, it dropped back on me like a ton of bricks from the sky. And it was crushing me to the ground. And in that moment of panic, I thought I heard the voice of God. And it sounded like my sponsor. He said, ask God at once to remove that fear, boy. Discuss it with someone immediately. Make amends quickly if you've harmed anyone. And then resolutely turn your thoughts to someone you can help. And I thought, I wonder what resolutely means. Well, we were about to enter into the Christmas spirit. In fact, my wife and I start celebrating the Christmas season right after Thanksgiving. And we do Christmas shows and all that. We're real big on Christmas. And I thought, there goes Christmas for this year. And I said, I wonder what resolutely means. Well, I knew that right after Christmas, people were going to go on, start their New Year's resolutions. 1st of January, bless God, they're going to quit smoking. Or bless God, they're going to go on a diet. And what they mean is that they're going to plant their feet and resist that, and lean into it and push with resolve, with intent, with focus. And I guess if I'm supposed to resolutely turn my thoughts to someone I can help, it means that I'm supposed to lean into this fear and push through it and reach out and tag another alcoholic and see what I can do to help him and not let this fear separate me from doing that. So I called my sponsor and reported in and told him the situation. And we prayed together. And I didn't owe any new amends on this one, but I started going to meetings with the intent of looking for someone to help. This is when I started listening to people in the meeting, what they were sharing. And if I heard somebody, it sounded like they were having a bad day, I would ask whoever drove me to the meeting to help me find them after the meeting. And I'd go, I didn't know a whole lot yet, but I would try to pray with them. I would try to share something encouraging with them. I deliberately did this. Sometimes I'd go back home and be reading my big book that evening and go, oh, wow, man, I wish I'd have known this right here, this page this morning. That's right, exactly what I needed to share with them. And I started marking stuff in the big book and going back to the meeting, looking for the people that needed that part, and I'd say, look what I found, look what I found. And I started really getting into finding. This is when I started reading the big book with intent to be of service. And we went through that Christmas season. I don't recall there being any lack of presents under the tree. And we came to the 1st of January to sit down and do our budget. We do the budget twice a month, at the first and in the middle. And we sat down, me and my wife, to do the budget. And the first half of the month looked like we had enough money to cover the bills. I kind of didn't think that was going to happen. And my wife said, how about we figure out for the whole month of January? And I thought, I don't know if I want to look that far into the future. It's kind of scary. But we did. We figured it out, and it looked like we were going to hit the end of January about $500 short. And I remember getting my wife's hand. I said, but Norma, if you get scared, ask God at once to remove it. Discuss it with someone immediately and make amends quickly if you've harmed anyone, and then resolutely turn your thoughts to someone you can help. And I thought, oh God, now I'm starting to sound like Ed. And this is when my wife and I became joined at the hip and being of service to other alcoholics. And we came to the 1st of February and there was enough money in the bank to pay the bills. And the 1st of March. And the 1st of April, and the 1st of May. And during this time, we were trying to regain our financial equilibrium. We canceled some things like cable and some magazine subscriptions, and we did what we could, but it sure wasn't enough to explain how this happened. I remember for 6 months, including Christmas, we didn't miss a beat. We did our best to be frugal, but life just seemed to not miss a beat. I remember sitting down one time saying, how did that happen? And I started thinking back. And I remembered a time about at the end of March. No, it was the end of February. I remember thinking, I better call the bank, and because it looked to me, our figuring that we was kind of about to scrape the bottom of the barrel. I thought I better call the bank, make sure that what they say we have is the same as what I think we have, because I can't afford bouncing checks, And so I called the bank, and it said we had $500 still in our checking account. Whoa. I don't think I made a $500 miscalculation. I waited a few days to see if the bank corrected it, and it did not. Man, I got real excited about that. You say, what, David? You saying God put $500 into your checking account? That sounds kind of far-fetched. I would hate to say that too loud. Y'all might think I was crazy, but somewhere down in my heart, I'm not sure what happened. I just know it was there. And I was so excited, I grabbed my gratitude journal, because I keep one of those. I hope you do too. And I started flipping through that journal to find my February page to write this entry. And as I was crossing through the January page, I found a spot that said, I called the bank today. And there was $150 in the bank, more than I thought we had. And I went, that kind of happened in January too. I remembered a time toward the end of March when they'd been announcing over at my home group that they were going to have this great speaker on Saturday night. So now I'm a person, I stay up at night and sleep during the day. But so Friday night I was up all night, and Saturday we had some business to take care of or something. I didn't get a chance to sleep. And by Saturday evening, I was wasted and ragged out. And Norma said, do you want to go out and do anything tonight? And I said, no, not really. I'll tell you what, there's supposed to be this great speaker over at the home group there. And I said, we can go over there and you can listen to the speaker, and I can sit in the back and doze in the chair if I need to. So we pulled up about 5 minutes to 8. This is back in the days when meetings were at 8 o'clock. We pulled up there about 5 minutes to 8, and we're walking up to the door, and the chairperson come busting out the door and grabbed me and said, Dave, our great speaker just called and canceled. And I thought, bummer. He said, will you speak? I said, oh, no, not me. I mean, I was just starting to learn my big book, and I was starting to, highlight and learn parts and starting to work with people a little bit, but I'm still kind of a beginner. And I said, no. And I said, and plus these people came to hear this great speaker. That ain't me. And I said, plus I haven't slept, and I don't know that I got the presence of mind to do it. And Norma said, this would be great for you, Dave. And she took me to the side and prayed with me and walked me in there and stuck me up behind the podium. And they said, with 5 minutes notice, here's Blind Dave. And I started out struggling. I was born in Houston, Texas in 1948. I mean, I wasn't sure if that was right. I just didn't have the presence of mind at the time. And so I don't know. I was slipping and sliding. And finally, after about 10 minutes, something happened. I felt it, and I'll never forget it. And I compare it to a time when me and some guys, I was back in high school, and one of our friends got a car, teenagers, and the first one in the bunch that got a car. And we got someone to buy us a case of beer, and we drove off into the country to find a place where we could drink our beer. And we turned off down this country road, and it'd been a lot of rain, and it started getting muddier and muddier, and we're going downhill also, and was kind of sliding a little bit. And we thought we better turn around and get out of here while we can. And we started to try to U-turn that car, and we slid off in the ditch and sunk up to the axles. So one of the guys had to walk all the way back up that country road to the highway and hitchhike back to town and get a friend of his who had a tow truck and came out there and drove. He couldn't even get all the way down to the car. It's too muddy. So he ran a long cable down there and hooked it onto the car. And he said, okay, he said, you start to give it the gas a little bit, and I'm going to take the slack out of this cable. And now I'm sitting in the front seat, just me and the driver, and he's giving it the gas. And our tires are spinning, I mean, we're sunk deep. And I said, there ain't no way that tow truck is going to pull this car out of this deep of mud and up this steep of a hill. And all of a sudden, I felt the slack come out of that cable. It just went ka-ching, and that car started up the hill. I mean, he's just dragging us up the hill, seemingly with no effort at all. The car's kind of sliding here and there, but it's going up the hill. I mean, we're almost pushing a wake of mud. And I said, good Lord, I can't believe the power that's in that truck. He said, yeah, they gear them winches really low. They got lots of power. And that's what I felt like that night. I was kind of slipping and sliding and spinning my wheels. And all of a sudden I felt the ka-chink. And it was like something grabbed hold of me. And y'all have all probably had the experience that'll bring tears to your eyes every time you remember it. And I've had it many times since. Ka-chink. And something laid hold of me. And I guess I got in some kind of groove. And I finished that talk, and people stood and cheered. This a long time ago, these standing ovations just on a regular home group meeting, they didn't always stand and do all that. I was quite surprised at how that whole room stood and clapped and cheered for a long time. Man, I was the man of the hour. Felt so good. And people come up and talking with me. And finally, everybody's gone, and me and Norma's driving home, and the excitement's all over, and I'm falling asleep in the car. And we get home, and Norma says, "Oh, by the way, somebody gave me a note that said someone had given to them to give to me to read to you when we got home." And I said, "Cool. What does it say?" So she unfolded this note, and $500 fell out of it. So we got through March. I remember those kind of things. Just because I started seriously focusing on helping other alcoholics. The big book says the central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. Suddenly, I believed that sentence. So I found myself in the world of the Spirit. I tend to forget it sometimes, and God has to remind me. I remember listening to a radio show one night where the guy was talking about the coming world depression. This is, some years ago, the coming world depression. I listened to that program for 2 hours until he had me worked into a frenzy. And he said, you can call my office and we'll send you a newsletter on how to prepare for the coming world depression. It's already started in certain places of the globe and it'll hit America soon. And oh man, I'm freaking out. It's about midnight. I'm walking around the living room going, oh my God, got to get ready for the coming world depression. And it's midnight and his office probably don't even open till 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And I got to wait 8 or 9 hours to even call and ask for the newsletter. All of a sudden God broke in that and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm thinking about preparing for the coming world depression. He said, what are the terms of our agreement? I said, oh yeah, that you're all powerful and will provide what I need if I will keep close to you and continue to perform your work well. He said, then why don't you just worry about that? I said, okay. It was the middle of the night. I just went and found my big book and sat down and started studying it so that I could, when opportunity presented itself, be of service and perform his work well. I tell you, my job is to take the steps to learn how to live on a spiritual basis, to experience God managing my life, to be willing to show other alcoholics how to have the same experience. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help them when no one else can. It happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful. There it is right there. God can use us in a way that nobody else can do the job. It's ours. It happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. All those years that I tried to serve God, 25 years in church, it was my biggest heart's desire, but alcoholism kept breaking out and shooting me out of the saddle. I'd leave a church. I'd switch denominations. I'd switch towns. But it always caught up with me. I felt like there was a bloodhound on my trail. It always sniffed me out and caught up with me and took me down again. I was cursed. I was cursed with alcoholism. It stole all my dreams. But when I became willing to fully surrender to the contract that God presents to us in Alcoholics Anonymous, the first thing God did was took my curse and gave it back to me as my gift. And now I am uniquely useful to serve God in this fellowship in a way that no other person on this planet can help alcoholics. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Then give freely of what you find and join us as we trudge this road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Thanks for inviting me to come share at your group.